Hi everyone, my name is Nate Sheets with Organ Behavior Consultation, and in this video we're going to be talking about the third section of the Organ Behavior Consultation Skills List, and that is the communication skills. If you haven't already watched the first two videos of the series, please make sure that you do so. In it, we're going to cover a lot of different skills that are handled in different parts of the brain. Communication skills are our ability to send and receive messages. We do this in a lot of different ways. For purposes of these videos, we're going to be splitting communication into two major categories: expressive communication and receptive communication. That leads us to skill number 15. How is the person at being able to express their thoughts, needs, desires, concerns into words or some other form of communication? Now, there are other forms of communication that don't include speaking, but for purposes of fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, almost certainly the person will be able to talk to some degree. There are different types of issues that can happen with expressive communication. For example, you might have the thought that you want to say, but you're just having trouble getting it out. When this is happening, you might see the person actually struggle to get the words out, or they may stutter. And in some cases, they're going to do other behaviors, such as saying, "I don't know," or getting escalated or frustrated. People with F.A.T tend to actually have pretty good expressive ability, sometimes even better than their peers. Though that person's skills in other areas are going to influence kind of what they're going to be talking about, the vocabulary they use, etc. And what we want to make clear, and we've talked about this in previous videos, is that just because somebody can speak well, that does not mean that they can process and understand at the same level that they can get the information out. That's called receptive communication, and we're going to talk about that next. So what is it like to have a receptive communication difficulty? Imagine a world that demands immediate answers and thoughts when you don't have the ability to say them. That's probably going to mean that people will assume that you don't have intelligence, or they're going to rush you, or they're going to dismiss what you have to say entirely. There's a way that we can simulate the frustration that occurs. There is a really cool app for your phone called Speech Jammer, and we're going to put a link in the description below. And what I'm going to do is use Speech Jammer to show what it's like to not be able to communicate your thought. I want to make it clear that the way that the app works is not the same thing that's going on in the brain for somebody who has an expressive communication difficulty. This app will actually record your voice and say it back to you, and that creates an issue in our brain that causes us to stop speaking. I'm going to put my earbuds in, and then I'm going to hit start, and I'm going to start talking to you, and you'll see that I'm going to start to struggle and then eventually stop. Okay, so I can hear myself talk right now, and it's taking a lot of effort, and now I have to think of what I'm going to talk about. So I really like dogs. I don't have a dog right now because my golden retriever passed away a few years ago, and where I'm living now, I can't have a dog. But I like golden retrievers, I like Alaskan Malamutes. What else do I like? I can't even think. So you can see how this kind of stops your ability to speak. And we can mess around with the settings to make it happen a lot quicker and to like literally not allow me to even push through it. So how does this relate to somebody who struggles with expressive communication skills? Well, imagine having something to say but not being able to say it or not being heard. That can create challenging behaviors. So how can we support someone with an expressive communication difficulty? Well, we can come up with another system. So another system would be sign language, or an app on an iPad, or a picture board, something like that, that allows them to communicate in a way that doesn't involve speech. We can also slow things down. Remember, low expressive does not necessarily mean that they don't talk. They just might need time to think about their thought or to initiate the action to say it. It will probably be helpful for you if you can make sure that you're talking to the person in an area where there's no distractions. Distractions make it difficult to pay attention, and not being able to pay attention means that formulating thoughts is going to be a lot more difficult. And one thing you should really watch out for is talking over the person. We tend to start interrupting people, especially when we think that we know where they're about to go. And if they're struggling with speech, sometimes we interrupt without even knowing it. Maybe we're doing it to prevent an awkwardness, or maybe we're kind of in a hurry and we want to make the conversation as efficient as possible. Oddly enough, sometimes my clients do this, but when they do it, it's considered to be, a problem that we should work through. So make sure that you're not doing it yourself. And again, people do it without realizing it. So just try to be mindful and make sure you're not doing it. The next skill number 16, receptive communication, is a really important skill to understand and provide support around, especially if you're working with somebody who has F.A.T. Receptive communication includes understanding what's being said, figures of speech, idioms, and interpreting signs and alternative forms of communication, such as the written word, so it includes reading. We've talked about this skill extensively in previous videos, and we're going to put links to them in the description here. But pretty much our supports around this are going to be using as few words as possible and giving them time to process what we're saying. And as much as possible, anything that we're saying, if it could be visualized, we're probably going to want to visualize it. Receptive communication challenges can take various different forms. One of the activities that I like to do in trainings, I actually got from a really good DVD called the F.A.T City Workshop. F.A.T stands for Frustration, Anxiety, and Tension. We'll put a link to where you can put this DVD in the description below. But needless to say, this DVD has had a big influence on the way that I conduct my trainings because I really see the value in trying to simulate a lot of these cognitive skill deficits that our clients have. And one of the great activities that they do involves this list. I want you to take a few moments and ask yourself if you know what each word on this list means. Go ahead and pause the video as you look over all of them and just ask yourself if you know what each word means individually. Good. So, did you know what each of the words mean individually? Or at least most of them? If you did, now ask yourself, is it a reasonable expectation that if I give you a sentence with these words, will you understand the sentence? If you're thinking that the answer to that question is yes, you're not alone. I do this live with many groups of people, and most people say, yeah, it's a reasonable expectation. But let's see if that's true. If the known relation between the variables consists of a table of corresponding values, the graph consists only of the corresponding set of isolated points. If the variables are known to vary continuously, one often draws a curve to show the variation. Did you process that sentence the first time I said it? We'll put it up for you now. Now, chances are, if you look over the sentence a couple of times, you're going to get varying degrees of what it means. If you have a background in math, you're probably going to pretty quickly, either from just hearing me say it or maybe reading it through once, the idea of what we're saying here. For those of you with maybe less experience in math, you might kind of get the gist that we're talking about math and maybe it has something to do with graphing. And then for those of you who don't know math at all, you might be totally in the dark. This means that the answer to the question of if you know what each word means individually, does that mean you're going to be able to process a sentence, is not necessarily. When I do this activity live, most participants do not know what I'm talking about. And this is true even if we're keeping our language in general short and clear. Remember, we have to give somebody time to think about what we're saying, or better yet, bypass verbal communication entirely if possible. You can text, you can write things down, and you can use alternative systems. And I want to talk about how really difficult it is to support this skill, especially in the moment. In your day-to-day interactions with this person, which for some of you might be a parent role, others of you might be a teacher, and others of you might be some kind of caregiver, you have to be continuously mindful about how you're communicating with them. And that's tough for us. We can't multitask very well, and we very easily get caught up in conversations. There are many other things that you can do to support somebody with poor receptive communication. Again, we're going to link to videos that discuss these things in the description below. The last cognitive task that we're going to talk about today is how the person is at identifying why they're upset or anxious or feeling some other kind of emotion. Again, there could be a lot that contributes to a lowering of this skill. If someone is upset, their cognitive skills drop, including their emotional regulation. Being able to think about what is bothering you in an abstract way takes a lot of brain power, and it's not even always obvious to the person feeling the emotion. Things like anxiety could be triggered by events or memories that occurred minutes or even hours before. And many people with a mental health issue such as anxiety constantly feel that emotion. So they'll feel anxious kind of at a baseline level, even on a good day. That can make understanding what your emotion currently is a little bit more difficult. And the same thing is true for people with a history of trauma, abuse, and neglect, which is a large portion of people with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. That's why we want to work on these skills both in a proactive context and a reactive context. In a proactive context, we're having all of these supports in place to help the person with their everyday needs and conversation. But we also want to use the proactive conversation model, which we'll link to in the description below, to come up with a system that allows the person to communicate with us when they're actually escalated. This means that we're going to have to practice it with them. Of course, the biggest thing that we could do to help support the skill would be to prevent escalation or any kind of stressors whatsoever, and that's not going to work. We can also proactively work on a way for the person to communicate their feelings to us when they're feeling the emotion. And by doing it proactively, using the proactive conversation and proactive plan model that we've talked about in other videos, we can practice with them to have it ready to go in the moment. How complicated the feelings are will be dependent on the person themselves. Some people can only handle really simple emotions like happy, mad, sad, and other people can handle more complex emotions like frustrated, anxious, disappointed, discouraged, etc. You're also going to want to keep the person's sensory needs in mind. If they're at risk of being overstimulated, they're probably not going to be able to communicate with you very well. And those are the communication skills in the Organ Behavior Consultation Cognitive Skills List. If you haven't already, you can subscribe to our channel by clicking the subscribe button here on YouTube, or you can like our page on Facebook. Of course, we always appreciate it when people share this video to those who they think it would benefit. Thanks for watching.